Welcome to the Boring Historian. Tonight, we journey back to the grimy, soot-stained heart of the Industrial Revolution, to the dark tunnels and choking dust of the Victorian coal mines. Far removed from the polished drawing rooms of London or the lush green fields of the countryside, these mines were places of sweat, danger, and endurance where men, women, and even children descended into the earth each day. We will walk slowly and without hurry through the life of a miner from dawn until the day's end, hearing the drip of water echo in the darkness, feeling the weight of the coal on tired backs, and smelling the ever-present temps of damp stone and burning lamp oil. This will not be the story of great inventions or famous men. It is the story of the ordinary, of work done in shadows so that Victorian homes could be lit, trains could run, and factories could roar. So, take a slow breath, settle in, and let us descend into the past. It is the kind of cold that seeps into the bones, the kind that no amount of wool can quite keep out. The small miner's cottage sits in a row with a dozen others, identical in shape, their chimneys leaning slightly, exhaling thin threads of smoke into the black winter sky. Inside the room is still cloaked in night. The coals in the hearth have long since died, leaving nothing but a grey crust of ash, and the faint, metallic smell that comes when a fire has gone cold. A hand stirs beneath the coarse wool blankets. It is a heavy hand, calloused, fingers stiff from years of gripping a pickaxe in damp, cramped tunnels. The first task of the day is the same as it has been for decades, to coax some warmth back into the room. There is no sudden click of a switch, no hum of a heater, only the ritual kneeling in the half-dark, striking flint against steel until the spark catches on a twist of paper, the orange glow licking at kindling, then the slow crackle as the flames begin to take hold. The air is heavy with yesterday's smells, the faint sour temps of damp clothes hung too close to the hearth to dry, the stale scent of bread kept under a cloth on the table, the ever-present ghost of coal dust that no amount of scrubbing seems to banish from the walls. Outside, the frost has settled thick on the small square of glass in the window, catching the dim shine of a lantern somewhere down the lane. In the corner, a kettle rests on the hearthstone, ready to be filled. The water will be cold, drawn from a bucket kept by the back door, and the steam when it begins to boil will be one of the day's few luxuries. There will be no feast for breakfast. The cupboard offers bread, a heel hardened from yesterday, and a small pot of dripping if the week's pay has been stretched carefully enough. The miner dresses slowly, not from idleness, but because every piece of clothing is worn thin, and care is taken not to tear what cannot easily be replaced. Trousers mended so many times that patches overlap patches, a shirt whose cuffs are permanently darkened, the fabric stiff where sweat and coal dust have mingled and dried. The boots are heavy, the leather softened from constant damp, their laces a mismatched collection of cord and string. From the next room comes a soft cough. His wife, stirring but not yet rising. She has her own long day ahead, one that will not end until the last dish is washed and the last sock mended by the dim light of an oil lamp. The miner lifts his lamp from the hook near the door. It is not yet lit. That will be done at the pit head, where the air is safer than inside a home with its delicate flames and children sleeping nearby. The door opens to the street. The cold outside is sharper still, cutting through cloth and skin alike. Breath fogs in the darkness, drifting away to join the low mist that hangs between the houses. A few other doors have opened along the road, and shapes move in the gloom. Men stepping out, heads down, lunch pails in hand, boots crunching on the frozen ground. No one speaks loudly. Conversation is in murmurs, the day's work too close in their thoughts to need many words. Somewhere, far off, a church clock tolls the half-hour. It is still hours before sunrise. The walk to the pit begins. Each step takes the miner farther from the faint warmth of the hearth and closer to the mouth of the mine, the place where the earth swallows the day whole. The lane outside the row of cottages is narrow and uneven, packed dirt that has frozen into ridges and ruts overnight. Each step is deliberate, partly because of the darkness, partly because these boots have long since lost their comfort, and a careless stone can bruise a foot for days. The night air holds the deep, almost metallic chill that only winter mornings can bring. It seeps into the lungs with every breath, stinging just a little, and carrying with it the mingled scents of chimney smoke, damp soil, and, faintly, coal. The houses fade behind in the gloom, and the shape of the village begins to give way to the open blackness of the surrounding countryside. There is no birdsong yet. The frost has stilled even the smallest of creatures. The only sounds are the measured crunch of boots on frozen ground, the occasional clearing of a throat. and the low murmur of a word or two exchanged between neighbors walking together in silence more than conversation. Here and there, a lantern swings gently from a gloved hand, casting a small, unsteady pool of yellow light onto the ground. The glow catches in the frost crystals on fence posts and on the sagging rails that run alongside the track, making them sparkle for a moment before fading back into shadow. Every so often, a boy hurries to keep pace with his father, clutching his own small tin lamp with a seriousness beyond his years. He has been working in the mine only a few months, and though the early mornings are still hard, the weight of routine is beginning to settle on him, just as it has on the men. As the path curves, the looming silhouette of the pithead begins to take shape against the faintest blush of gray in the eastern sky. It rises above the landscape, the tall headframe of timber and iron, the winding gear perched atop it like a black crown, and the thin plume of smoke curling from the boiler house chimney. From this distance, the machinery speaks in low, steady groans, and the occasional sharp clank of chain-striking metal. The smell of the mine reaches you before the gate does, a mingling of damp stone, engine oil, and the acrid temps of coal dust that settles into everything it touches. It is not unpleasant exactly, but it is unmistakable. The kind of smell that lingers in hair and clothing long after the shift is over. Near the entrance, men are already gathering in small groups, stamping their feet to keep the blood moving, holding their hands close to their bodies for warmth. The foreman stands with a ledger, his cap pulled low over his brow, calling out names as each man approaches. A brass token is handed over, small, cold, and heavy for its size. It will be hung on a board in the tally room, marking the miner's presence underground. At the end of the day, it must be returned. If it is not, it means the man has not come back. A faint glow of firelight leaks from the boiler house windows, and the rhythmic hiss of steam being released drifts through the air. Somewhere, a whistle blows briefly, a signal for the next cage to come up or go down. There is no time to linger. The shift will begin whether the men are ready or not. The miner steps toward the narrow gate, the tall frame of the pithead above him, the machinery's heartbeat in the ground beneath his boots. Ahead lies the descent, the long drop into the earth, where the sun will not reach for the rest of the day. The gate creaks on its hinges as you step inside the pit yard. Underfoot, the ground is blackened and gritty, each step sending up a faint crunch of coal dust. A thin mist hangs in the air, swirling faintly around the figures of men as they move toward the pithead. The looming frame above you groans softly as the great wheels turn, thick cables winding and unwinding in a slow, steady rhythm. Somewhere nearby, the hiss of escaping steam punctuates the otherwise muffled quiet, and every so often the sharp ring of metal on metal echoes off the yard's brick walls. The cage is waiting at the pit mouth, a rough platform of heavy planks, framed in iron with sides just high enough to keep a man from stepping out too soon. The floor is damp, marked with muddy boot prints from the shift before. The cable above disappears into the darkness of the headframe, thick as a man's arm and coated in black grease. Every so often, it trembles faintly as the machinery above shifts its weight. Men file in without a word, stepping close to one another in the confined space. There is no sense of hurry, but there is no lingering either. The work waits below, and the foreman's eyes follow every movement to ensure the routine is followed. Your boots settle onto the damp boards. You feel the cold seep up through the soles, and you place a hand on the iron frame. Not for balance, but for something solid to hold on to. A boy no older than 14 stands near the edge, his lamp dangling from a hook on his belt. He stares into the dark opening below, his face pale but unreadable. This is not his first ascent. The older men speak to him in low tones. A joke, perhaps, though their voices are too quiet to catch the words. With a signal from the banksman, a crisp ring of the bell, the cage jerks once, then begins its slow, deliberate drop into the shaft. The daylight above shrinks to a pale circle, then to a pinprick, and finally disappears altogether. The darkness swallows everything, thick and absolute, until only the flickering light from the miners' lamps remains. The air changes almost immediately. It cools, becoming damp and heavy, carrying the earthy scent of stone that has never felt the sun. Droplets of water slide down the timbers that line the shaft, dripping onto the cage roof with soft, irregular taps. The timbers themselves creak under their own weight, their grain darkened by years of moisture and coal dust. Every few seconds, you pass a crossbeam or a ledge of rock, each one lit briefly by the trembling yellow light before slipping back into shadow. The sound of the machinery above fades, replaced by the deep, muffled groan of the earth itself. The quiet pressure of tons of stone on all sides. Somewhere in the distance, a faint rumble reminds you that the mine is already awake, that picks are already striking coal, and carts are already moving along the rails. The descent takes longer than you expect. Time seems to stretch in the darkness, the only measure of distance being the damp air growing colder and the faint ache in your ears as the pressure shifts. Finally, there is another bell signal. The cable slows, and the cage comes to a rattling stop. The gate is unlatched, and the men step out into a tunnel barely high enough to stand upright. The walls are close, wet to the touch, and glistening in the lamplight. The floor is uneven, a mixture of packed dirt, stray bits of coal, and shallow puddles. Here, hundreds of feet below the surface, the day's real work begins. The light from the cage fades quickly as you step into the narrow drift, your boots sinking slightly into the uneven ground. The ceiling is low here, too low for a tall man to stand straight, forcing most to hunch forward. The timbers that brace the walls and roof are thick, rough-hewn, and darkened almost black from coal dust and years of damp. Between them, the rock is exposed, a mix of slate, shale, and the gleaming black seams of coal that are the mine's lifeblood. The air is close, still, and heavy. It carries with it a blend of scents that is unlike anything above ground. The earthy tanks of freshly cut stone, the faint sulfur of the coal itself, the oily smoke from lamps, and the unmistakable smell of damp cloth and human sweat. Every breath tastes faintly metallic, as though the air has been filtered through stone. Ahead, the tunnel curves into darkness. The only light comes from the small flames of oil lamps hooked to belts or carried in hands. Dim halos that illuminate little more than a few feet in any direction. The shadows they cast leap and sway with every step, making the tunnels seem to shift and change shape as you walk. Here, far from the surface, sound behaves differently. The clink of a pick striking stone carries farther than it should, echoing faintly off unseen walls. The creak of timber supports seems to come from nowhere in particular, sometimes so soft you wonder if you imagined it, other times sharp enough to make men glance up warily. Somewhere far away, the rumble of a coal cart being pushed along iron rails vibrates faintly underfoot. The miners move with quiet efficiency, each knowing the path to his assigned place. Some branch off into side passages, narrow openings where the roof dips so low that they must stoop deeply to enter. These passages will be their world for the rest of the shift. You pass a small alcove cut into the tunnel wall. The lamp station here. A man sits on a wooden stool, checking each miner's lamp as they come through. He fills oil reservoirs from a dented can, trims wicks with practiced hands, and checks for any damage that might make the flame dangerous in the mine's volatile air. It's a brief pause in the journey, and most men exchange only a nod before continuing on. Further ahead, the tunnel opens slightly, revealing a small gathering point. Wooden beams overhead drip steadily into shallow puddles, the sound a slow, irregular patter. Tools are stacked against the wall, picks with worn handles, shovels, wedges, and sledgehammers. A wooden cart sits on a short section of track, its iron wheels rusted to a dull reddish brown. The cart will be filled many times before the shift is over, each load hauled back toward the shaft by human muscle or, in some mines, by pit ponies. The foreman stands here, a tall figure in the lamplight, his voice low but firm as he directs men to their work. His coat is worn, his cap pulled low, and his hands, though gloved, are thick with calluses. He notes each man's name in a small ledger, before sending him down one of the side passages. There is no small talk, only the business of the day. When it is your turn, he gestures down a narrow road, the ceiling pressing in so tightly that the lamplight barely clears your head. The air feels cooler there, and you can already hear the faint rhythm of pickaxes in the distance. This will be the place you work for the next 12 hours. As you step forward, the weight of the earth above feels almost tangible, as though it is pressing gently down on your shoulders. The light behind you fades, and ahead lies only the sound of labor and the black gleam of coal waiting to be cut from the rock. The passage narrows until it feels more like a fissure in the earth than a man-made tunnel. You have to stoop now, knees bent slightly, the roof so low that the brim of your cap almost brushes it. The lamplight reveals the coal seam ahead, a deep, dull black that swallows light rather than reflecting it. It is jagged in places, smoother in others, the result of hundreds of hours of picks biting into its surface. You set your lamp in a small hollow cut into the wall, where it casts its dim glow across the face of the seam. The light is weak, its yellow halo barely reaching the edges of your workspace, but it is enough to see where the pick must fall. The tool's wooden shaft is worn smooth from years of hands gripping it, its iron head blackened and chipped from striking rock. The first swing is always the hardest, muscles still stiff from the cold on the walk, breath still settling into a rhythm. The pick bites into the coal with a dull crunch, sending a small spray of black dust into the air. The sound is strangely muted, absorbed by the close walls. A second swing follows, then a third, each one sending another fragment tumbling down to join the small pile at your feet. The work is steady, deliberate. You are not hacking wildly at the wall. The coal is valuable, and the cuts must be made with precision. Wedges are driven into narrow cracks with the handle of the pick, prying larger chunks free. Each piece is hefted into a small wooden box or directly into the waiting cart. If one has been brought close, the dust clings to everything, to your face, your hair, your clothes, working its way into the fabric so deeply that even after washing, it will leave faint shadows. After only a few minutes, the warmth of exertion begins to replace the morning chill. Sweat gathers at the back of your neck and along your spine, and the close air does little to cool you. You pause briefly to wipe your brow with the back of your sleeve, the motion leaving a faint smear of black across your skin. Somewhere in the darkness beyond, another miner coughs, a deep, rattling sound that echoes off the walls before fading away. The cough is not unusual here. The dust works its way into lungs just as it works its way into clothes, and most men have grown used to it. But it is a reminder all the same of what the air in these tunnels can do over time. The only sounds now are the rhythmic thud of pick on coal, the occasional grunt of effort, and the soft hiss of the oil lamp's flame. The world outside the mine might as well not exist. There is no wind here, no sound of birds or carts or human chatter, only this small, dimly lit space, and the endless black rock ahead. As the pile at your feet grows, you pause to shovel it into the cart. The coal's weight is deceptive. A small mound can strain the arms and back, each load adding to the day's slow accumulation of exhaustion. The cart's iron wheels squeal faintly as they shift under the load, the sound oddly loud in the muffled dark. Then it is back to the wall. The pick swings again. The dust rises again. And the long day stretches ahead, measured not in hours, but in how many times the pick will bite into the coal before you are called back toward the light. The day began long before the sun had a chance to rise over the soot-darkened rooftops of the mining village. It was often still the deep, gray hours of early morning, when the world felt heavy with sleep and the cold air nipped sharply at any exposed skin. A coal miner's alarm was seldom a clock, but the rough voices of family members stirring, the creak of floorboards, and the dull, steady noises of other households awakening nearby, the sound of boots scraping on rough wooden floors, the rustling of thick woolen garments being pulled on hurriedly. The miners lived in rows of cramped terraced houses, built close together to hold as many families as possible near the pit. These houses were cold and draughty, their stone walls soaked with moisture from the damp English climate. Before leaving home, the men would wrap themselves tightly in heavy coats, often worn through in places but still offering some shield against the chill. Thick scarves were wrapped around necks, hats pulled low to block the biting wind, and sturdy boots tied tight. Outside, the air was dense with the smell of smoke and coal dust. The sky above was a dull canvas of gray clouds, often hanging low and heavy, threatening rain or snow in colder months. The walk to the mine was short but somber. Groups of miners, silent or speaking in low voices, trudged along narrow cobblestone streets. The cold air made their breath visible, soft clouds that dissolved into the morning haze. At the pit head, the towering wooden structures of the winding gear loomed like skeletal giants against the pale light. Here, the day's work would begin, a descent into a world few could imagine. Each miner carried the weight of the day ahead in their minds, the long hours underground, the hard labor, the constant risks. Yet there was no choice. This was the reality of working-class life during the height of Victorian industrialization. And so, with a final deep breath of the cold, damp morning air, they prepared to enter the darkness. After gathering at the pit head, the miners waited quietly for their turn to enter the cage. A small, cramped wooden lift suspended by thick iron chains. The cage was barely large enough to hold a handful of men, their equipment, and the weight of their anticipation. As the gate clattered shut behind them, a hushed silence settled over the small space. The cold air inside the cage was thick and still, carrying the faint scent of damp wood, sweat, and coal dust from previous journeys. The men exchanged few words. Any sound seemed swallowed quickly by the surrounding darkness. Then, with a groan from the rusted gears above, the cage began its slow descent. The miners could feel the subtle vibrations through their boots as the wooden floor shifted, rattling down the deep shaft. Outside the cage, the shaft walls were little more than black voids, disappearing into the endless depth. The deeper they went, the colder the air became. The chill was no longer just from the early morning breeze, but from the earth itself, damp, unyielding, and lifeless. Water droplets trickled down the walls, occasionally splashing softly on the cage's wooden frame. Light from the surface faded quickly, swallowed by the enclosing rock. Soon the miners were surrounded entirely by darkness, a darkness so complete it seemed almost physical, pressing in on all sides. The air was heavier here. Each breath felt thicker, weighted with the fine particles of coal dust and stale moisture that clung to the underground atmosphere. Every inhale was a reminder of the environment's unfriendliness, and yet the men had grown accustomed to it, breathing steadily despite the discomfort. As the cage creaked and rattled lower and lower, sounds from the surface but some distant footsteps. The chatter of workers faded until they were gone. Only the faint echo of dripping water remained, a slow, irregular tapping that measured the passing seconds in the quiet descent. The journey could take several minutes, depending on how far the coal seams lay beneath the surface. For some mines, this meant traveling hundreds of feet straight down, deeper than most men would ever venture outside of these grim tunnels. For the miners, the descent was more than a physical journey, it was a psychological transition. Above-ground life, with its fleeting warmth and sunlight, belonged to a different world. Below, only work, danger, and darkness awaited. When the cage finally came to a halt with a jarring stop, the gate swung open to reveal the tunnel beyond. Narrow, low-ceilinged, and lined with rough timber supports. The miner stepped out carefully, boots meeting the soft, muddy earth floor. The temperature here was lower still, dampness seeping through their clothes. The flicker of flickering carbide lamps or candles was the only source of light, casting long, dancing shadows that seemed to stretch and twist in the still air. The men adjusted their lamps, their small circles of light barely pushing back the overwhelming darkness, and with the first step into the tunnel, the day's labor truly began. Far from the surface, in the earth's cold embrace, where every moment was a test of endurance and will. Stepping deeper into the tunnels, the miners found themselves in spaces so tight that standing upright was often impossible. The passageways had been carved out by hand or blasted using rudimentary tools, following the veins of coal hidden within the earth's layers. Yet, the space was barely larger than the men themselves, sometimes no more than a few feet wide and less than 4 feet high. The ceiling pressed low above their heads, forcing many miners to stoop or crawl on hands and knees. The rough stone walls were uneven and damp, slick with moisture that glistened faintly in the flickering lamplight. The air was thick with a mixture of dust, earth, and the faint, metallic temps of the coal seams. Each step forward was cautious. The floor was uneven, sometimes muddy, occasionally littered with loose rock fragments or the broken remains of timber supports. Water pooled in shallow depressions, making the ground slippery and cold against heavy boots. The miners carried pickaxes, shovels, and small lanterns attached to their belts or helmets. The lamps cast narrow cones of light, barely enough to reveal the immediate surroundings beyond the lamplight. Darkness clung to the walls and ceiling like a living thing, swallowing sound and movement alike. In these confined spaces, movement was slow and deliberate. There was no room to rush or swing tools carelessly. Miners worked side by side, sometimes forced to squeeze past one another in the narrow corridors. Their bodies coated in black dust and sweat, moved with a practiced rhythm, a dance of survival in the underground maze. The work itself was grueling. Miners used their pickaxes to chip away at the coal seams embedded in the rock face, aiming to break the black stone free in chunks that could be shoveled or loaded onto carts. The coal seams varied in thickness, sometimes only a few inches, other times stretching several feet wide. But the challenge was the same: to extract as much coal as possible without causing the fragile walls or ceiling to collapse. Because of the tight quarters, the miners had to work hunched over, their backs bent in painful arches. The constant bending and twisting strained muscles and joints, adding a physical toll beyond the immediate dangers of the work. Conversations were rare. The constant noise of picks striking rock and coal filled the space, and miners often spoke only in whispers or gestures. The close quarters meant every sound echoed strangely: a clink of tools, the scrape of boots, the soft murmur of voices. Yet these noises were muffled by the dense air and thick walls. Dust was everywhere. With every swing of a pick, fine black particles rose into the air, settling slowly on skin, clothes, and equipment. The dust was gritty and heavy, leaving a thick coating that could not be washed away easily. In some sections, the tunnels branched off into smaller galleries or chambers, each requiring the miners to navigate narrow, twisting paths to reach new seams. The layout was complex, a labyrinth beneath the surface, with little natural light or fresh air, yet the miners adapted. their senses sharpened to the environment, listening for creaks in timber, feeling for drafts that could signal changes in the earth, and watching the way the walls seemed to shift imperceptibly. This world was claustrophobic and relentless, but it was their workplace, a place where strength, endurance, and skill were tested every hour of the day. And so, in the dim glow of their lamps, surrounded by walls that seemed to close in, the miners carried on, chipping, scraping, shoveling, inch by exhausting inch. Beneath the earth's surface, danger was never far away. Every inch of tunnel carved into the rock was a precarious balance between man and nature, a fragile act that could be undone in an instant. The very ground around the miners seemed to hold its breath, waiting to shift, crack, or give way. The tunnels were supported by timber beams and props, thick wooden posts carefully placed to hold up the weight of the earth above. These supports creaked and groaned constantly under immense pressure. The wood, often soaked by water dripping from the rock, weakened over time. Miners knew that even the slightest snap or shift could signal disaster. The sounds in the tunnels were clues. Faint cracks, the subtle sliding of stone, or the sudden snap of a beam could mean that the ground was moving. Miners learned to listen intently, their nerves taut, ready to react. Yet the earth was unpredictable. A seemingly stable wall could suddenly crumble, sending dust and debris tumbling into the passageways. A ceiling might collapse without warning, crushing everything beneath. These moments were terrifying and often fatal. To reduce risks, miners followed strict protocols. Before entering new areas, they would examine the rock for signs of instability, hairline cracks, bulges, or unusual moisture. They reinforced supports regularly, replacing old timber with fresh beams. But resources were limited, and the pressure to maintain production often led to shortcuts. Mine inspectors, when present, checked tunnels for safety, but their numbers were few, and their power limited. Many mines were privately owned, with owners focused on profit rather than the well-being of workers. The miners themselves bore the weight of risk every day. Despite all precautions, accidents were frequent. Collapses could trap men for hours or days, leaving them isolated in the darkness, with only the faintest hope of rescue. Stories circulated of entire sections buried beneath tons of rock, of desperate attempts to dig out comrades, of the haunting silence that followed a sudden disaster. The toll on families and communities was immense. A single collapse could destroy dozens of lives in moments. The constant threat shaped the miners' mindset. Fear was never far from their thoughts, but it was balanced by a grim acceptance. They knew the risks, understood the dangers, yet returned to the tunnels day after day out of necessity. This fragile line between life and death lent a quiet urgency to every movement underground. Every step was measured, every action deliberate. Miners looked out for one another, sharing warnings and lending support in the face of common peril. In this way, the mine was not just a place of work, but a dangerous world where survival depended on vigilance, skill, and sometimes sheer luck. And so, beneath the surface, in the cold dark silence, the miners persevered, shadowed constantly by the ever-present threat of collapse. As the miners pressed deeper into the earth, the temperature dropped noticeably. The warmth of the sun, the caress of a gentle breeze, these were comforts they could only imagine in the distant world above. Below ground, the cold was unyielding, seeping into every pore, every bone. The air was thick with moisture. Water dripped constantly from the rough rock ceiling in irregular, slow drops, sometimes gentle, sometimes heavy enough to soak the miners standing beneath. This steady rhythm of falling water became a constant background sound, a reminder of the dampness that clung relentlessly to the mine. The walls themselves were often slick with moisture, shimmering faintly in the flickering lamplight. The ground beneath their boots was frequently soft and muddy, soaking into worn leather and mixing with the fine coal dust to form a grimy paste that coated the miners from their ankles upward. Clothing offered little protection. Miners wore heavy woolen garments and sturdy boots, but these soon became saturated with cold water, losing any insulating properties. The dampness clung stubbornly, chilling the skin and chilling the spirit. The cold slowed movements, fingers stiffened, making the delicate work of handling tools more difficult. Faces became pale and drawn. Joints ached, muscles tensed involuntarily against the chill. Even breathing felt colder, the icy air a sharp sting to the lungs. Despite the physical discomfort, the miners rarely stopped. Rest was a luxury rarely afforded. They pushed through the cold, driven by the need to extract coal, the lifeblood of the Victorian industrial machine. Cold seeped beyond the body, affecting the mind. The oppressive dampness and chill could sap energy and hope. It was a weight as heavy as the coal itself, an enemy that could not be fought with pickaxe or shovel. Sometimes, the miners would find small pockets of warmer air, near steam pipes or natural geothermal vents, and gather briefly to regain warmth. These moments were fleeting but cherished, brief respites in the relentless cold. Prolonged exposure brought sickness. The damp, cold environment was a breeding ground for respiratory illnesses, rheumatism, and other ailments. Many miners suffered persistent coughs, fevers, and aching bodies, a slow toll paid for years of endurance. Outside, families anxiously awaited their return, often unaware of the full extent of the cold that their loved ones endured below. Letters spoke little of discomfort. Silence masked the brutal reality. The cold was unrelenting, a constant companion in the underground world, chilling the miners to their core as they chipped away at the coal, day after long day. The work of a Victorian coal miner was relentless, a ceaseless, exhausting rhythm of motion, sound, and toil that stretched from the first steps underground until the bitter end of the shift. It was a labor that tested the limits of the body and the mind, a routine so repetitive it often blurred into a haze of motion and dust. From the moment the miners descended into the tunnels, they were engulfed by the demands of their tasks. The first tool was the pickaxe, a heavy, blunt instrument that needed to be swung again and again against the hard coal seams embedded in the rock face. Each strike required strength, precision, and endurance. As the pick slowly chipped away at the coal, fragment by fragment, the confined space made this work even more grueling. Miners crouched or stooped, their backs bent under the weight of both the body and the tools. Muscles ached and joints groaned with the strain of constant movement. Hands, already numb from the cold and damp, gripped the pick tightly. The skin cracked and raw from exposure to grit and grime. As pieces of coal broke free, they were shoveled or gathered by hand into small carts or baskets. These were then hauled by pit ponies or pushed by other miners through narrow passageways to the surface. The process was unending, an endless cycle of breaking, collecting, and moving. The environment added to the exhaustion. Dust clouds rose with every swing, infiltrating the lungs, choking breath, and reducing visibility. The faint light of carbide lamps did little to ease the strain on the eyes, which grew tired from the poor illumination and the constant need to focus. Breaks were few and brief. There was little time to rest in the cold, damp tunnels, where stillness meant stiffening muscles and growing fatigue. Miners took what moments they could, a sip of water, a bite of hard bread, then returned to their work, pushed on by necessity and the knowledge that their families depended on their labor. The monotony of the work weighed heavily on the mind, day after day. The same motions, the same sounds of picks striking rock, shovels scraping coal, and the distant rumble of machinery created a hypnotic, almost numbing effect. Many miners reported feeling disconnected from time and place, as if trapped in a never-ending loop of toil. Yet, within this monotony, small moments of camaraderie offered relief. A whispered joke, a brief word of encouragement, a shared glance between exhausted men provided a fragile thread of humanity in the oppressive darkness. Despite the exhaustion and hardship, the miners pressed on, their strength, resilience, and determination keeping the heart of the industrial age beating. Each chunk of coal they extracted fed the fires of factories, warmed homes, and powered locomotives. And so, in the endless cycle of monotonous labor, the Victorian coal miner endured, a silent, steadfast figure in the shadowed world beneath the surface. Amidst the constant hammering of pickaxes and the scrape of shovels, there was an unseen adversary lurking in every breath the miners took. Coal dust was a fine, powdery substance, almost imperceptible, yet it wove itself into the fabric of every moment underground. This dust was everywhere, floating silently in the stale air, settling on skin, clinging to clothes, and penetrating deep into the lungs. With every inhalation, the miners drew in millions of tiny particles, invisible to the naked eye but devastating in their effects. For many, coal dust was the harbinger of a slow and cruel illness known as black lung disease, or pneumonia. This condition developed over years, as the tiny dust particles accumulated in lung tissue, causing inflammation, scarring, and a progressive loss of respiratory function. In the early days of Victorian mining, the dangers of coal dust were poorly understood. Protective equipment was minimal or non-existent. The miners had no masks or respirators, and washing facilities were often inadequate. After a shift, black dust covered every inch of their bodies, embedding itself in skin and hair, and transferring to homes and families. The symptoms of black lung were insidious. a persistent cough, increasing breathlessness, fatigue, and chest pain. Over time, sufferers found even simple tasks exhausting. The disease often led to a slow suffocation, a gradual inability to breathe that ultimately claimed many lives. Beyond black lung, coal dust contributed to other respiratory problems, including chronic bronchitis and emphysema. Frequent exposure also increased vulnerability to infections such as tuberculosis, which spread rapidly in the crowded, damp conditions both underground and in miners' homes. The invisible dust was also a fire hazard. When suspended in air in high concentrations, it could ignite explosively. Catastrophic coal dust explosions claimed many lives, turning mines into deadly traps of flame and smoke. Despite these dangers, the mines operated with few safety measures against dust. Water sprays and ventilation systems were often inadequate or neglected in the rush to maximize production. Miners were left to endure the consequences, their health sacrificed for economic survival. Families bore the burden as well. Clothes and bedding brought home layers of coal dust, exposing children and spouses to the same harmful particles. The cycle of illness and hardship extended beyond the tunnels, infiltrating daily life. Yet, in the face of this invisible enemy, miners persevered. They adapted to the conditions, developed coping mechanisms, and relied on community and solidarity to face an uncertain future. The dust was relentless, but so were they, men bound by duty, necessity, and an unspoken bond forged in the depths of the earth. In the deep, twisting tunnels of the Victorian coal mines, alongside the tireless human labor, another vital presence quietly supported the grueling work: the pit ponies. These small, sturdy horses were more than just beasts of burden. They were companions, comrades, and lifelines in the oppressive darkness underground. Pit ponies were typically breeds known for their strength, docility, and ability to navigate narrow spaces, often Welsh ponies or similar types, chosen for their small size and resilience. Many of these animals were born and raised in the mines themselves, never seeing the sunlight above. From the moment they were brought down as foals, they became accustomed to the strange and eerie underground world. The ponies were assigned to pull heavy carts loaded with coal from the extraction sites through the labyrinthine tunnels to the surface. Their work was grueling but essential. Without their strength, the transportation of coal would have been far slower and more dangerous for the miners. The tunnels were so narrow that the ponies had to learn to maneuver carefully, avoiding low ceilings and sharp turns. Their hooves were often shod with special shoes designed to provide grip on the slippery, muddy floors. Miners took great care in guiding them through the darkness, using soft voices and gentle taps to calm the animals, who could sense the tension and danger surrounding them. Life underground was harsh for the ponies. They were exposed to the same cold dampness and dust that plagued the miners. The limited air and constant darkness could be disorienting. Despite this, the animals developed a remarkable ability to adapt, forming strong bonds with their handlers. Many miners cared deeply for the ponies, considering them essential partners in the daily struggle. The animals' endurance and calm temperament offered small moments of comfort amid the bleak surroundings. Stories passed between men about particularly brave or gentle ponies, or about the silent understanding shared between a handler and his animal. However, the ponies' lives were often short. The harsh conditions, accidents, and poor nutrition meant that many did not survive long underground. When a pony became too weak or injured, it was often taken back to the surface or euthanized to prevent suffering. Besides ponies, other helpers played smaller roles. Dogs, sometimes used in specific tasks such as guarding entrances or assisting in rescue operations, were occasionally present. Mechanical aids were limited during much of the Victorian era, though later decades saw the introduction of rudimentary rail systems and conveyor belts to ease the burden. Despite the mechanization creeping in, the human-animal partnership remained central to mining operations. The trust and interdependence between miners and pit ponies underscored the shared hardships beneath the surface. In this dark, dangerous world, the ponies were silent heroes, unassuming but indispensable, their steady steps helping to carry the weight of a nation's industrial dreams. After long grueling hours in the dark, damp tunnels, the miners emerged from the pithead, carrying with them the grime and exhaustion that seemed to cling as stubbornly as the coal dust on their skin. Yet, above ground, life moved on. In the tight-knit villages clustered around the mines, communities thrived in their own quiet, resilient way. These mining villages were often built hastily to accommodate the influx of workers needed for expanding operations. Rows of terraced houses stretched along narrow streets, packed closely together. their brick walls blackened by soot and smoke from nearby factories and coal-burning homes. Despite the often harsh physical conditions of these homes, small, cold, and overcrowded, a strong social fabric held the communities together. The miners and their families shared a collective identity shaped by common hardships and mutual reliance. In the early evenings, as the miners returned, the streets would come alive with a subdued energy. Children played in the muddy yards and alleys, their laughter a brief, bright contrast to the somber faces of adults. Women gathered to wash clothes in communal washhouses or shared stories and gossip over fences. The local pubs served as crucial gathering points for the miners. After shifts that often lasted 12 hours or more, these establishments offered warmth, light, and a chance for relaxation. The atmosphere was a mix of camaraderie and quiet reflection. Here, miners swapped tales of the day's labor, expressed frustrations, and found moments of levity through shared jokes or songs. These pubs were also centers for organizing and discussion. The bonds forged over pints of bitter beer strengthened a collective spirit that would later fuel labor movements and strikes. Despite exhaustion, the miners took pride in their solidarity and the support of their community. Churches and chapels dotted the villages as well, offering spiritual solace and a sense of order amidst the chaos of industrial life. Sunday services provided rare respite from the harshness of work, as families gathered in modest pews to find comfort and hope. Education was limited but gradually improving. Some children attended small local schools, though many left early to work in mines or factories. Literacy was a treasured skill, passed down carefully by those who had the opportunity. Social events, though sparse, brought moments of joy. Seasonal fairs, community dances, and sporting matches allowed miners and their families to momentarily escape the grim realities of their daily existence. Life in these villages was marked by a mix of hardship and resilience, hardship and hope. The miners' identities were deeply intertwined with their surroundings, a place where work and home, danger and comfort, suffering and solidarity coexisted. Though the world outside often overlooked these communities, within them lay the beating heart of the Industrial Revolution, a human story of endurance and quiet courage, lived out every day beneath the ever-present shadow of the coal mine. Beneath the surface of the Victorian coal mining industry lay a complex web of authority and control, a system designed to balance the relentless demand for coal with the fragile lives of the miners. Central to this system were the checkers and officials, figures whose presence was both essential and often resented. Checkers were responsible for measuring the amount of coal each miner extracted during a shift. Their task was critical. Miners were typically paid based on the volume or weight of coal they produced. This piecework system meant that the checkers held considerable influence over a miner's earnings. At the pit head or within the mine, checkers weighed coal carts or baskets, recording the amounts meticulously. For miners, these figures directly translated into livelihood or hardship. Any mistake or accusation of shortchanging could mean weeks of lost income. Tensions often ran high. Miners worried about unfair deductions, accusations of theft, or arbitrary decisions by checkers who sometimes lacked sympathy for the workers' struggles. Disputes were common, and checkers had to navigate the delicate balance between enforcing rules and maintaining fragile trust. Above the checkers, mine officials held broader responsibilities, overseeing operations, enforcing safety protocols when they existed, and ensuring production targets were met. Their role was frequently conflicted. While some officials sought to protect workers and maintain safe conditions, many were pressured by owners to prioritize output and profits. This tension was a source of ongoing conflict. Safety measures were often overlooked or neglected in the rush to keep the coal flowing. Officials who raised concerns could find themselves sidelined or dismissed. For miners, this meant working under conditions that were sometimes knowingly unsafe. Inspectors, occasionally appointed by government bodies, attempted to enforce regulations designed to protect workers. However, inspections were infrequent and often superficial. The sheer scale of mining operations and the isolated nature of many pits made enforcement difficult. The authority of officials was absolute within the mine. Miners had little recourse if they felt wronged or endangered. Complaints could lead to retaliation, job loss, or blacklisting. This imbalance of power compounded the already difficult circumstances. Yet, within this system, some officials earned respect for their fairness and efforts to improve conditions. They acted as mediators and advocates, sometimes risking their positions to champion workers' welfare. The miners' relationship with checkers and officials was complex, marked by suspicion, frustration, and occasional cooperation. These roles embodied the wider struggle between labor and management that defined much of the Victorian industrial era. Understanding this dynamic is crucial to grasping the full reality of coal mining life, where every piece of coal weighed not only in pounds but in human cost, controlled by unseen hands, balancing profit and peril. Though the miners spent most of their days far beneath the earth's surface, the weather above ground was never far from their thoughts. It shaped their routines, affected the mine's conditions, and influenced the health and well-being of the men and their families. The relentless English climate was an unyielding force, often cold, damp, and grey, and its effects permeated every aspect of mining life. In the early mornings, before descent, the miners faced weather that could be bitterly cold in winter or damp and foggy in other seasons. Their thick, worn clothing offered some defense, but the chill often penetrated through to their skin, chilling them before they even entered the tunnels. Heavy rains were particularly feared. When the skies opened and rain poured down relentlessly, the mines could flood. Water seeped through the earth and into the tunnels, turning floors into muddy quagmires and pooling in dangerous areas. Flooding slowed or halted work entirely, as pumps struggled to keep the water at bay. The weight of water in the mines also increased the risk of collapses. Saturated timber supports weakened, rock faces softened, and unstable ground became even more unpredictable. Miners had to navigate these hazards carefully, their vigilance heightened during and after storms. Fog and smog were constant companions above ground, blending smoke from the coal fires with natural mist to create a dense, choking haze. This murky atmosphere clung to clothes, skin, and lungs, exacerbating respiratory illnesses common among miners and their families. Winter brought its own unique challenges. Frost coated the mine entrances, making the steps slippery and treacherous. The cold air outside was harsh and biting, and when combined with damp clothing and exhaustion, miners risked hypothermia and other cold-related ailments. Inside the mine, temperature variations were subtle but significant, while the earth's warmth sometimes offset the chill outside. The constant dripping of water and poor ventilation kept the tunnels damp and cold. This unchanging environment could cause muscle stiffness and fatigue, especially for those working long shifts. Severe weather above ground also affected transport and supply chains. Coal needed to reach factories, railways, and markets, but heavy snow, rain, or flooding often delayed shipments. This, in turn, put pressure on miners to increase output during better conditions, intensifying their workload. Families suffered as well. The weather dictated the rhythms of daily life, washing clothes in icy water, dealing with leaks and dampness in poorly insulated homes, and coping with illnesses exacerbated by cold, damp environments. Despite the persistent challenges, miners and their communities adapted. Layers of clothing were worn and repaired constantly, homes were weatherproofed as best as possible, and schedules shifted to accommodate the whims of the weather. The mood of the villagers often reflected the skies. Grey days brought weariness, but rare sunny moments inspired brief celebrations and hope. In this way, the weather was more than a backdrop. It was an active participant in the miners' story, shaping their labor, health, and spirit in quiet but profound ways. While the miners toiled in the depths of the earth, their families lived in constant anxiety above ground, the burden of the unknown weighing heavily on wives, children, and elderly relatives. The life of a mining family in a Victorian village was shaped by absence, hardship, and a quiet resilience born from the ever-present dangers lurking beneath the soil. The men's long shifts meant that much of the day passed with only fleeting contact. Many miners worked 12 hours or more underground, leaving little time or energy for family life. Their return was often greeted with weary smiles, rushed meals, and the pressing needs of a household that could not wait. Women bore the dual weight of maintaining the home and caring for children, often with scarce resources. They washed clothes by hand in freezing water, prepared simple meals from basic ingredients, and patched worn garments, all while managing the household budgets stretched thin by irregular earnings. Childcare was another constant challenge. Many children were sent to work in factories or even the mines themselves as soon as they were old enough, sometimes as young as 7 or 8. Those who remained at home were cared for by mothers, older siblings, or neighbors, fostering close-knit communities where everyone helped one another. The constant fear of accidents haunted the families. Every delay at the pithead, every unexplained absence, sparked worry and prayers. Women gathered in small groups, sharing news and comforting each other through the uncertainty. The sound of the mine whistle signaling shift changes was both a reassurance and a reminder of the risks. Illness was common. The damp, overcrowded homes, combined with poor nutrition and exposure to coal dust brought in from the mines, created a breeding ground for respiratory diseases and infections. Tuberculosis and bronchitis were frequent visitors, and medical care was limited and often unaffordable. Loss was an ever-present shadow. Many families had lost fathers, brothers, or sons to mining accidents or illnesses. Widows and orphans were left to navigate a harsh world with little support. Charitable organizations and community efforts offered some relief, but the hardship remained profound. Despite these challenges, mining families exhibited remarkable strength and solidarity. Neighbors leaned on each other, sharing food, childcare, and support. Churches and local groups provided social and spiritual sustenance, organizing events that brought moments of joy and distraction from daily struggles. Children's education was valued, though often interrupted by economic necessity. Schools were basic and overcrowded, but literacy and learning offered a glimmer of hope for a better future beyond the mines. In the evenings after the miners returned home exhausted, families gathered to share what little warmth and comfort they could find. Simple meals were eaten together by candlelight, stories were told, and plans made for the next day. The lives of those above ground were intertwined with the underground world, each shaping the other in ways both seen and unseen. The sacrifices of families sustained the miners' labor, while the dangers beneath the surface shaped the rhythms of daily life above. In this delicate balance of endurance and hope, the true cost of Victorian coal mining was revealed, a human story of love, loss, and resilience. One of the most significant developments in the history of Victorian coal mining was the introduction of safety lamps, a technological advancement born out of necessity and tragedy. These lamps were more than just sources of light. They represented a fragile hope for safety in a world dominated by darkness and danger. Before safety lamps, miners relied on open flames candles or oil lamps to illuminate the pitch-black tunnels. These sources of light were perilous, given the presence of flammable gases, particularly methane, often called fire damp. A single spark or flicker could ignite a catastrophic explosion, bringing death and destruction in an instant. Mining disasters caused by fire damp were tragically common. Explosions ripped through tunnels, collapsing walls and ceilings, trapping men underground, and devastating entire communities. Each incident left families shattered, villages mourning, and a mining industry desperate for solutions. The invention of the safety lamp was a response to this urgent need. The first practical design was created by Sir Humphrey Davy in 1815. His lamp was ingeniously simple, a flame enclosed within a fine mesh screen that prevented the ignition of flammable gases outside the lamp. The design allowed miners to see and carry a light safely without igniting the deadly methane surrounding them. The arrival of safety lamps slowly changed the miners' experience underground. For the first time they could carry a reliable light source that reduced the risk of explosions. The soft glow of the lamps provided a comforting presence in the dark tunnels, a small but powerful shield against the unknown dangers lurking in the air. However, the adoption of safety lamps was not immediate or universal. Some mine owners resisted the expense or doubted the lamp's effectiveness, while some miners preferred the brighter light of open flames despite the risks. Training was necessary to ensure proper use, as misuse could render the lamps ineffective or dangerous. Beyond preventing explosions, the safety lamps also became tools for detecting gas. Miners learned to watch the behavior of the flame flickering, color changes, or dimming as warnings of hazardous atmospheres. This gave workers precious time to evacuate or take precautions, saving countless lives over the decades. Despite these advances, dangers remained. Safety lamps could fail, be damaged, or improperly maintained. The lamp's soft light was dim compared to open flames, making work more difficult and sometimes leading miners to remove protective screens. Nevertheless, the safety lamp marked a turning point. It symbolized the beginnings of industrial safety, awareness, and the slow progress toward valuing the lives of those who labored beneath the surface. In the cold, damp, and dark tunnels of Victorian coal mines, the gentle glow of the safety lamp was a beacon of hope, offering not just illumination, but a fragile promise of survival in an unforgiving world. Amid the relentless hardships of Victorian coal mining, another force began to take shape. The growing movement of miners coming together to fight for better conditions, fair wages, and basic rights. This movement was embodied in the formation of miners' unions, a powerful collective voice born from shared struggle and determination. In the early days of industrial coal mining, workers were isolated and vulnerable. Each miner was paid individually, often at piecework rates, creating fierce competition and little solidarity. Mine owners held immense power, dictating wages, hours, and conditions with little regard for safety or fairness. The injustices were many. Dangerous working environments, long hours, low pay, and the ever-present threat of injury or death. Miners' families bore the brunt of this inequality, living in poverty and fear. Faced with these challenges, miners began to organize. Small local groups formed to discuss grievances, share information, and provide mutual support. These informal gatherings grew into more formal unions, with elected representatives and defined goals. Union meetings were often held in village halls, church basements, or local pubs, places where miners could gather after exhausting shifts underground. Here, they debated strategies, planned strikes, and offered solidarity to those who suffered accidents or layoffs. One of the earliest and most influential unions was the Miners' Federation of Great Britain. Founded in the late 19th century, it became a powerful advocate for miners' rights, pushing for legislative reforms, better pay, and safer working conditions. Strikes were a key tool of collective action. When negotiations with mine owners failed, miners organized walkouts, shutting down production to demand fair treatment. These strikes were often difficult and dangerous. Miners risked blacklisting, loss of income, and violent repression by authorities or private security forces. Despite these risks, strikes and union efforts brought tangible improvements over time. Legislation introduced minimum safety standards, limits on working hours, and compensation for injuries. Though progress was slow and hard-won, the unions gave miners a sense of agency and hope. Beyond workplace issues, unions fostered community solidarity. They organized social events, educational programs, and mutual aid societies that provided support in times of illness, injury, or unemployment. The sense of brotherhood forged in the mines extended into union halls, where men found strength not just in their labor, but in their shared identity and purpose. This collective action challenged the power imbalance between miners and mine owners, sowing seeds of social change that rippled far beyond the tunnels. The story of miners' unions is one of courage and perseverance, a testament to the human spirit's ability to unite and resist even the harshest oppression. Through these unions, miners carved out a voice beneath the earth, demanding dignity, justice, and a safer future for themselves and generations to come. As we draw this long, slow journey through the depths of Victorian coal mining to a close, it is worth pausing to reflect on the full tapestry of life beneath the earth and its lasting echoes above. For decades, miners descended daily into darkness, into narrow, suffocating tunnels where every breath was thick with coal dust, every movement a fight against exhaustion, every moment shadowed by danger. Their world was one of cold dampness, oppressive silence, and the constant threat of collapse or explosion. It was a world far removed from the glittering cities and grand industries their labor fueled. Yet, within this harsh reality was an unbreakable spirit, men and women bound by community, family, and a shared struggle. The miners' villages above the pits were alive with resilience, places where love and laughter flickered amid poverty and hardship, where families clung to hope in the face of loss. The miners themselves embodied endurance, their hands bore the scars of relentless toil. Their lungs carried the weight of invisible dust. Their hearts held the courage to return underground day after day, for the sake of their children's futures and their neighbors' survival. The story of Victorian coal mining is not just about suffering or exploitation. It is a testament to human dignity amid adversity. It is about the power of solidarity, in unions that fought for safer conditions, fair wages, and respect. It is about small acts of kindness between men in the depths, and the silent bonds forged in shared hardship. Today the mines have largely fallen silent. The black smoke has cleared, and modern industry has moved on. But the legacy remains, in the landscapes shaped by mining, in the communities that still bear the echoes of that era, and in the stories passed down through generations. Remembering the miners means honoring both the darkness they endured and the light they helped create. It means acknowledging the true cost of progress, the sacrifices made in shadow so that others might thrive. As we close this chapter, we carry with us a deeper understanding and quiet respect for those who labored unseen beneath the earth. Their story is woven into the history of a nation and into the very fabric of human endurance. So now, with the gentle sound of time's passing and the lingering echo of pickaxes fading into silence, let us rest. mindful of the past, grateful for the present, and hopeful for the future. This has been The Boring Historian, guiding you through the slow, steady heartbeat of history beneath the surface. Thank you for journeying with me into the depths of Victorian coal mining. May the quiet strength of those miners stay with you as you drift into rest.